Welcome to Sankofa Community Affairs with Brother Salim Adolfo. Today we are here with the president of the Association of Black Psychologists, Washington, D.C. chapter, Dr. AFIYA MBILISHAKA. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm very, very happy to be here.
Thank you for coming on. Can you tell us about ABPSI?
Yes, I can. So the Association of Black Psychologists was an organization founded in 1968. If we think about what was going on in 1968, it was a lot. And so a lot was going on for black psychologists too. So for the American Psychological Association, the convention that year was in the Bay Area in San Francisco. And so unfortunately, black psychologists haven't been treated that well by them, this organization. And so it was at the National Convention that year that a group of black psychologists actually decided that they shouldn't be members anymore and formed their own organization, the Association of Black Psychologists. And so with that, they said the primary identity was being black, and the secondary identity was being a psychologist. So that's where the spirit of Association of Black Psychologists came from. And so its mission is the illumination of the African spirit, the liberation of the African mind, and the empowerment of the African character. And so if you believe in those things, you can join the association. It's focused on students. Most of our members are students and professionals around the country and even around the world. We have, I think, nationally or internationally about 1,500 members, but it should be growing, because although black people make up about 12% of the U.S. population, only about 3 or 4% of psychologists are black. So it's really addressing how do we get more people to address the mental health needs of the community.
What are some of the projects that the organization has worked on?
Oh, quite a few, but the most recent is something called Emotional Emancipation Circles, or EECs. It's training community members how to run group therapy. Group therapy to address race-related stress. So with all of the police brutality and race-related murders, just economic deprivation and other factors affecting the black community, that black psychologists are training anyone who's interested in healing the black community these skill sets on how to run a group. So it could be in a barbershop, a beauty salon, at a church, or other safe spaces where you can really get into the emotional depths of what's going on and really free ourselves from the stress of being black in America.
Well, I would say that I personally think that our stress that we have currently stems from slavery. And I believe, was it Dr. Joy DeGruy?
Yes.
She had a phrase that she came up with, post-traumatic slavery syndrome. Do you think that's something that's real?
Yes, I think it's very real. As Dr. Joy DeGruy talks about, we never got to really heal from slavery. It wasn't like after the Emancipation Proclamation came out that we got free counseling services and everyone got their own therapist with the 40 acres and a mule, right? We never got to address our mental health needs of the intergenerational trauma for hundreds of years. So yes, I think that there are consequences psychologically from being enslaved, but also has slavery really ended, in terms of thinking about that. But Dr. DeGruy talks about different elements of this post-traumatic slavery syndrome. She says that part of it is ever-present anger, that in a split second, a black person could go off in terms of emotionally needing to express this rage, or some would say historical hostility, this anger. There's a statement I'm sure you've heard that hurt people hurt people. Right. And so even thinking about that being a consequence of enslavement, that anger is very present and can be connected to violence or other factors, but healing hasn't taken place. She also talks about the concept of vacant self-esteem, that black people tend to value themselves on things that might not really matter, and the things that do matter, they might devalue. So vacant self-esteem could speak to like, oh, you know, needing to get the latest shoes or the newest Jordans, because that speaks to your self-esteem more than your character or qualities. So vacant self-esteem. And then another factor she talks about is racist socialization. She said we're constantly being bombarded with images of white supremacy and black inferiority. Whether you're watching TV, every time you're watching TV, it's perpetuating that mindset. Or just even going to school where maybe the majority of students are black, the school is dirty, there's broken glass, these factors show, and then you go to a white school and see how much better things are, that they have the latest TVs and screens and computers. And so psychologically, she said that's perpetuating that enslavement mentality, because you're seeing that you're not getting a lot of support, care, or services, and so maybe you don't deserve it. And so that's a big factor.
So in trying to seek help for this, is this something you can actually go to the doctor for, or that your insurance company will cover? Has mainstream medicine acknowledged that there is something actually called post-traumatic slavery syndrome?
No, that's the simplest response, no. So the book that determines what is a disorder is called the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. And so it's in its 5th edition. It started in the 1950s and 1952, and as of 2013, that latest version came out. And so what makes something a disorder or not a disorder is based on norms or culture. Your culture determines whether something is healthy or not healthy in terms of mental health. And so in American society and culture, and this book is put out by the American Psychiatric Association, they're saying that it doesn't constitute a disorder. Maybe it should be normal for Black people to have trauma that's not addressed, because it kind of keeps things going. When you have a population that is disempowered and you need people to work, sometimes that goes together. And so by not labeling some of the symptoms that Dr. DeGroot says are challenging, that is kind of neglecting the needs and maybe even neglecting treatment for that as well.
Well, you touched on something. You said culture, and one of my favorite authors, Amos Wilson, always goes back to culture as being the thing that could save us, or the abandoning of our culture could be the thing that hurts us. Where do you see culture as a mechanism for us to improve our situation? Well, first, can you define what culture is?
Okay. I like to use Wade Noble's definition of culture. Wade Nobles is a famous Black psychologist, actually one of the founders of the Association of Black Psychologists. He was a student then, and now he's an elder. But he defines culture, well, in 1986, he said culture is a design for living and patterns for interpreting reality. I'll say that again. Designs for living and patterns for interpreting reality. So culture is everything. I don't like when people say, no, I don't have a culture. That you're living, even the language you said that in was your culture, or the perspective of saying that. Everyone has a culture. And so some cultures are prioritized over others. And even thinking about Amos Wilson, and his importance of culture, he says we're actually possessed by other people's culture in terms of Black people, that we're practicing a European culture. And if you're Black and you practice European culture, you can never be mentally healthy. And so to align yourself with African culture is actually what is healing. I think that's probably touching.
Well, he's also, Amos Wilson's had a variety of different things that he's touched on. And one of them is economics. And so where does culture play a role for us in terms of economics, and then how does that even connect to our mental health? I mean, how do all of these things intersect?
All right. Well, Amos Wilson says that you have to keep people out of their minds to be able to do the work of their enslaver or the people who are oppressing them. So the world's population in general is less than 10% of the world's population is white, but they own the majority of businesses and media and all these different factors. So with that, to keep that working class, to keep Black people in positions, not in positions of power, but in inferiority, that we have to be out of our minds. Because if we just even really practice European culture, we'd want our own businesses, we'd want to practice our own religions, we want to speak our own languages, we want to run things, we want to have our own schools. But because we're out of our minds and not realizing the power that we have or that we had, that there's going to be this internal conflict and not be healthy.
All right, we need to take a break, but we're going to come back and touch on some more of this. You're watching Sankofa Community Affairs with Brother Slim Adolfo. We'll be right back.
Get up, I know you found a way shades of gray. Now it's our turn. Go to ourturntohelp.org and donate what you can. Hope is on the way.
Welcome back to Sankofa Community Affairs. Today we are discussing mental health in the Black community with Dr. AFIYA MBILISHAKA. She is president of the Association of Black Psychologists, Washington, D.C. chapter. Currently in the news, Colin Kaepernick and other NFL players, as well as some other athletes, are protesting during the singing of the national anthem. They're either sitting down, kneeling, or putting their fists up. And as a result, we've seen some children, student athletes of all ages, mimic what they see. How important do you think it is for entertainers and the athletes to take political stances on the psychology of our young students?
Oh, I think it's critically important to think about the images and how it works even with our minds. We tend to imitate the things that we see. And so if there is an image of Black power, I think we should imitate that too, for sure. It makes me think about different psychology studies or concepts. For example, the concept of the mirror neuron. So a neuron is the most basic cell of the nervous system. So the nervous system includes the brain, the spinal cord, just basically the nervous system sends and receives messages throughout your body. So I bring that up because mirror neurons are neurons or cells in the brain that makes us replicate what we see, whether it's emotionally, copy, or even physically. So I think the images that we see, our bodies can even act them out. So if that image is putting up a black fist, I think we can replicate that too, especially for children. Because as James Baldwin says, children might not be the best listeners, but they never fail to imitate. So I think that's a factor in there for sure for celebrities impacting.
All right, so I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but if we feel that children imitate what they see, is it a coincidence or is it by design that we see a station like BET or any other station that caters to the African American population to consistently show images of us not being in a healthy state of mind? Is it by design or is it that this is what's selling currently? What do you think?
Well, I think I'm a conspiracy theorist too. So I think we've been conditioned. So conditioning is basically a permanent change to behavior. And it usually occurs through repetition of stimuli to get a certain response. So in psychology, you've probably heard of Pavlov and the dogs, or even Skinner and Skinner's box. I think that there are things that are paired together to get a certain reaction or response, or we're even deprived of certain things that when we're offered a resource will behave in a certain way. So I'm just, again, thinking about how conditioning, and especially something called social cognitive learning, again, how we copy and replicate these things that we see, that we actually internalize it and practice those things. It might not be our true nature, but through conditioning, we behave and think in a certain way. And the media is the biggest power tool in shaping the way that we think and behave.
So then how do we get to the point to where we can have more control over the images that we see?
Good question. I think we can create those to be able to create a program like this for sure that can counter condition. So that can happen. So I think a big piece of the work I do as a clinical psychologist is to counter condition, pairing Blackness with something else, pairing Blackness with beauty, pairing Blackness with intelligence. So even in my classes, that I'll show certain images or songs or rhythms that wouldn't typically be paired with learning, but I put it in there to make sure that we're seen. The way that I even start my psychology classes, that I'll start not where the textbook says with William Wundt and this, German person starting psychology. I start with Imhotep in terms of the world's first documented genius. The first time the word brain was ever used was by Imhotep. You know how if you call someone smart, you might call them like a brain surgeon? No, he was a brain surgeon. And he had, in the Edwin Smith papyrus papers, it documents in there over 27 brain injuries that he was able to do brain surgery on. And so that's where I start, even in that educational environment. So again, even bring it more than just TV or YouTube, but to bring it into the classroom where I consistently share messages and counter condition that Black people are geniuses. We always have been, and we always will.
Well, you use the term blackness, and I think about a book that I once read called I Write What I Like by Steve Biko. And he was an author in South Africa at the time of the height of the Black consciousness movement. How would you define Black consciousness?
I think Black consciousness is to have a clear understanding of what being Black is, and that being Black is powerful. I went to South Africa in February. It was an amazing experience, and I got to read much more into why the Black consciousness movement was needed in South Africa, because the role of Europeans in colonizing that area, we don't always think about slavery happening in Africa, but even the slavery to some degree where people were forced to do certain work, live in certain places, have bad conditions, that Steve Biko had to come up with a counter-conditioning measure to say, no, Blackness is good, because in a Venetian psychology, as talked about by Dr. Jules Harrell, that Black was bad, white was good, right? That, you know, when thinking about colors, that we always think the dark is bad, but the white is good. But he needs to flip that. No, Black is good. It's important. You need to understand that there's a global presence, that we make up 1 billion people worldwide. We're just spread out all over together. And so to have that connecting Black thought, that collective unconscious, is much more powerful than thinking individually. And so to have, I guess, this diasporic connection, and that there's goodness and power in numbers, I think that speaks to Black consciousness.
So I've had similar conversations with just the average everyday person, and what I get from a lot of people is, well, I don't want to be someone who's a hater, or I don't want to seem like I'm a racist. And they talking about, well, we need to be more multicultural, or we need to embrace everybody, or I'm not just Black, I got Indian in my family, or I got Irish in my family. And I believe some of these things may be true, but why do you think that amongst people who are looked at as Black from the outside world, there's so much resistance to accepting who they are?
Well, I think no one wants to be on the losing team.
Okay.
And so that basically means that the way that Black people are portrayed in society, in terms of even in person or in the media, that we're always losing. We have been victimized. Why would you want to identify with the people who are always losing? And so I think that history and information has been formulated in a way, maybe even called scientific colonialism, shaped in terms of the political power and position of knowledge, that it seems like we're losers. And so, but if you really have a clear understanding of history, that's where it can be liberating. That history, especially African history, is healing. And so I think that that would be a way to address that identity dilemma, that identity conflict, that to know that you are Black, but to not feel connected is because you want to be a winner. And you should be a winner, because we are, and we have been, and we will be in the future too. So
then tell me, how do you feel about Barack Obama being the first, Black president? Because for some people, like my grandmother, she cried. She was overjoyed and ecstatic, and I'm guessing that was because of the time she grew up in, where Black people couldn't even look a white person in the eye without being hung. And to go from that to seeing a Black person in the seat of what she considers to be the most powerful seat in the world did a lot for her. But then you got some people who are on the opposite side of saying, well, he ain't the first Black person to become president. There's tons of countries in Africa that have had Black leaders. So he ain't the first of anything. And there's everybody in the middle. Where do you see that as being something that can be uplifting or not being uplifting for us?
Well, you have me thinking about character. I think it's very important that our Black leaders have good character, because if they don't, then it's just putting a Black face on white supremacy, on white power. And so that's not what I want to happen in terms of when we think about our leadership. So even thinking about someone like Thomas Sankara of Burkina Faso, that how his good character, this upright man, was able to present a positive Black leadership role around the world, and especially in Africa. But it's challenging. I've been disappointed even with what happened with Obama. He rode on this hope that Black people need to win. And so we need to win something. And so even winning an election just brought hope globally. But if we look at information of his presidency, that there's been a lot of death and loss for Black people in Africa in terms of bombings and drones that he actually connected to, and even here in terms of the amount of violence and police brutality that's happened during his presidency. Yes, he can't change that, but I think sometimes having an image or an idol made people think this was a post-racial America when it's not, that now the work needs to even be done more aggressively because there's that dissonance between getting that presidency role and actually what our real lives are like now.
All right, we need to take one more break. We'll be right back. You're watching Sankofa Community Affairs. We'll be back.
Every time I hear the alarm bell go off in school, I think it's an air raid.
A lot of houses in our neighborhood have been destroyed. I like to close my ears and sing songs whenever the bombs come close.
I'm worried our new neighbors won't like us.
But I know it's all gonna be worth it. I just want my family to be safe. But these are not my words.
These are not my words.
These are not my words.
Welcome back to Sankofa Community Affairs. And as you know, we're discussing mental health in the Black community with Dr. AFIYA MBILISHAKA. She's the president of the Association of Black Psychologists, Washington, D.C. chapter. Earlier in the show, you mentioned the DSM. Can you elaborate more on the DSM?
Yes. So the DSM is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. The most recent version of it is the DSM-5, which came out in 2013. And so this is a book that contains every mental health disorder according to psychiatrists, with consultations from psychologists and social workers to form this book. But in there, it lists all the details, criteria